Hello, everyone. This is Adrian. I'm your host of Rolling Stories, the HR podcast brought to you by Rolling Arrays. Did you know that the Singapore Public Service employs more than 150,000 public officers working in 16 ministries and more than 50 statutory boards? And the public service has undergone several phases of transformation since Singapore's independence, each anchored by an ethos of public service that seeks to understand the fears, concerns, and aspirations of Singaporeans, strives to constantly do better with our people and for our people, and invests time and effort to preempt tomorrow's challenges. Now, all these things may sound like just fun facts to you, but it does lead to a kind of efficiency that we experience day to day when we need to interact with the public service. And of course, people make a huge part in that equation to not just drive the efficiency, but importantly, to maintain it. To share more with us on this today is Ms. Peck Kem, the CHRO at Public Service Division. Hi, Peck Kem. Thank you for coming onto the show.
Thanks, Adrian. My name is Peck Kem, and I am the Chief HR Officer for the Singapore Public Service. And like what Adrian said, the Singapore Public Service is by and large the single largest employer in Singapore. And we hire like 150,000 public officers. So what I do in the Singapore Public Service is really as the head of the profession for HR within the public service. And my role is really to create an environment within the public service so that we are really an employer of choice and we have a conducive, good working environment that people will look forward to wanting to work in the public service, and really to profess and to serve our ethos of being in the public service, of wanting to serve Singaporeans and wanting to serve our Singapore-based businesses, and all done with ethos of integrity, service, and excellence.
Since you've been on both sides of the fence, in your opinion, what are some of the key differences and perhaps what are some of the common misconceptions that you may want to take the opportunity to dispel?
Yes, indeed, Adrian. I have been in the private sector for many years before I decided to go into public service. And in between, I actually went into an NGO as well. So fortunately for me, public service actually have revolving door policy where, even though you have joined, I joined public service as a mid-career. And after 5 years or so with the Ministry of Manpower, I actually went to work in Geneva for a not-for-profit organization called the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. And it's been almost 9 years since I came back to Singapore and worked in the Public Service Division, which is part of the Prime Minister's office. So I've been asked quite often because I started off my career actually as an engineer, and midway I actually switched to become a HR practitioner. So I've been often asked, hey, what's the difference between practicing HR in the private sector versus in the public service? So I think as a HR practitioner, a people issue is a people issue. And whether you're a private sector engineer or you're a public sector engineer, I think the kind of challenges and all that you face are quite similar. And it's just the difference, I think, in terms of, like you rightly pointed out, the perception of public service versus in the private sector. So I've been in Hewlett Packard, I've been in disk drive companies, and I've been in the public service for 15 years or so. And like I said, in terms of the kind of work environment, the culture, and even in the private sector, depends on the kind of companies that you join. Some have more progressive practices, some are not so progressive in their practices. And that makes a difference in the employee experience. So I think in the same context, even with the public service, even though we say we are one public service, but sometimes different agencies have a bit of a different culture. And that also affects the kind of experiences that our public officers go through. And we try to standardize quite a fair bit of it. But in general, there are still quite a fair bit of diversity and different kind of challenges that you will face in different agencies.
Now, given that PSD is quite a huge employer, how does your HR lens take a look at this upcoming challenge of an aging population as well as a very low TFR? Because in the future, it might really be even impossible to find any new talent coming out from university.
Indeed, Adrian, and that is not just a public service issue, that is a Singapore national issue. That because of our very low TFR, or fertility rate, we need 2.1 to sustain ourselves. We are like 1.02 today, and even with SG50 and we throw in all kinds of incentives, kind of pull up to 1.2, but it has dropped.
I tried my best, but I can only
Well
do so
done.
much.
Well done, Adrian.
For listeners who may not be aware, I actually have 4 kids. So I always tell people I'm the point one. Otherwise, there's no point one.
Yeah. So I think not many youngsters wants to have that many kids. But that aside, at the national level, of course, we try to encourage more procreation, to have more Singaporeans. Because indeed, like what you said, when you have low fertility rate, the aging workforce becomes a bit more enhanced. And by 2030, actually, you will have, I think, one in 4 that are above 65 years old. So it is actually quite worrisome, because by 2030, you're just not going to have additional workforce coming, Singaporeans adding into the workforce, because you have people who are retiring, and then you have people who come into the workforce, and you can see from the school sizes are getting smaller.
Oh yes, more combining.
Yeah, so you have more outflow and you have less inflow. So net, you're just going to get zero growth in terms of Singapore citizens entering the workforce. So as HR practitioners, we need to be cognizant of what are the challenges that we are facing. And I think it is a bit more pronounced in the public service, because we tend to hire more Singaporeans and PRs, mainly because of national security issues. Whereas in the past, in the private sector, I can always, complement with some foreign talent. And today, 1 in 3 in our workforce are actually foreign talent. Okay. So in the public service, we have lesser of that flexibility to bring in more foreign talent. And with that, we also are cognizant of we shouldn't take more than our fair share of Singaporeans and PRs into public service, because if we hire all of them, then the private sector will say, hey, I just don't have Singaporeans to hire. And you set a quota, I cannot hire foreigners, and so on and so forth. So we actually have an added challenge, especially in the public service, that we really, for all the policies that we want to roll out, we really have to take a lead. Okay. So taking into consideration the national imperatives, in general, when we look at the workforce, not only in the public service, but at the national level, we really look at what we call the 3 Ws: the future of work, the future of workforce, and the future of workplace. In terms of the future of workforce, which is something which we are very passionate about, like you said, we need to be cognizant that you have aging population, and if I still insist that retirement age is just going to be 62 or 63 now, and you just let people flow out, and then with low fertility rate, so with zero workforce growth, how are you going to still continue to grow your business? Okay, and if you say that, let's hire more foreign talent, today it is 1 in 3. What if it is the other way around? Because we don't have enough Singaporeans? So can you imagine in the workforce or in the meeting today, if the person to your right and the person to your left is a Singaporean, in all likelihood, you're the foreign talent. That's 1 in 3. Okay. Can you imagine by 2030, because we just don't have enough Singaporeans and we just turn on the tap and let all the foreigners come in? Okay, we can say, I only want skilled workers and all that. And if there's ratio turns around, maybe not in 2030, maybe 2040, and it becomes 1 in 3 are only Singaporeans. And in that same meeting room in Singapore that you sit in, if the person to your right and to your left are foreigners, you are the only Singaporean. So when we work in such an environment, what needs to change? So before we get to that ratio, we need to consider what are the plans that we have in place to make sure that it is the kind of workforce composition that we need to meet our business needs. So if our business are mainly serving Singaporeans, for example, by 2030, what is that profile of the customers that you're looking at? So it is important for us in the workforce to make sure that if you have a certain composition of workforce, if you have done your strategic workforce plan and you know your business enough to know that these are the kind of challenges the business is facing. And what kind of challenges are you facing as a HR person in terms of getting that workforce ready to meet that near-term as well as the long-term future of the organizations? So today, when we talk about the workforce, it is not just making sure that our workforce is skilled for today. We have to make sure that our workforce is skilled for the future. And we are really talking about future readiness. And in Singapore, I think we are very fortunate in the sense that the tripartite partners, together with the government, is putting a lot of investments in skills upgrading and to make sure that our workforce continues to be employable into the future. So even in the public service, we are not looking at lifelong employment. We are actually investing a lot in lifelong employability. So that's in terms of the workforce. And in your question about what are some innovation or innovative things we are doing, what is the creative things that we are doing in the public service to really make sure that our workforce is employable into the future? So one of the key things, like you pointed out earlier, I came from the private sector. Every 5 to 8 years, I actually change a job. So in every job change, I pick up new skills. Okay, I understand the new environment, and I make myself and I invest in myself to make sure that I acquire skills that keeps me relevant and I can value add to the organization that I'm working in. In the same context, I think in the past, we tend to hire people and we value lifelong employment in terms of employment loyalty, for example. Today, I'm not too sure that loyalty still have the same level of currency. And if somebody has been in the same job for the last 20 years, unless this person consciously upskill themselves, otherwise you would question whether are you able to change and able to adapt. So that workforce agility is something that we want to value, and the adaptability. Okay, so these are new skills that we want in our workforce. And some of the things that we are doing is consciously move people around. We have structured job rotation. And then we tell you, after 5 years that you're doing in this job and you're doing quite well, I'll give you a nudge. Hey, Adrian, would you like to consider this other agency to contribute in this other capacity? And it's not necessarily a promotion, but for you to try something new and try something different and pick up new skills. And that in many ways enhances your resume and make you a bit more prepared and a bit more open to consider other opportunities. So while we want to develop depth in expertise, we also want to make sure that we create that flexibility in your muscles and the agility muscles that you may not have before. So while you develop the depth, we also want to experience in a different environment. For example, I used to work in Singapore for the longest time. Even though I cover region and all that and I travel for business, it is quite different relocating and working in Geneva because the culture is different. How people react, how people respond to the same kind of people practices is very different. And once I've experienced that, and once I have managed an organization that is like that, and managed in that kind of culture, you cannot take it away from me anymore. So that's some of the things that we are doing in terms of trying to build agility into the workforce.
Remote work, hybrid work. How does a workplace and how does your department actually straddle between these two extreme opposite ends?
Extreme opposite ends as in...
Because on one side, you have to cater to ensure, okay, no data leakage, national security is being taken care of, which also means I can't really take information back home to work. So how does remote working then work in that aspect? I do remember, and this was many years ago, I'm not sure if it's still happening, there was some step board or ministry, even for them to access internet, they have to go to a terminal because it was that staunch back then. How does one actually manage this balance between these two?
Indeed, I think, Adrian, that was quite long ago, and times have changed. I think as Singapore becomes more of a smart nation, the public service and the government also has to become a smarter government and more digital in many ways. So, well, many people are talking about ChatGPT. Well, the public service, we do use ChatGPT. I think it would be silly of us to say that for security concerns, let's just shut down all the technology and all that, because it just doesn't happen that way. As in all smart initiatives, to be more digital savvy and to be a smart nation, we also have to be selective of which are the areas that we need to build firewalls and which are the areas that we think these are the areas where we need to open up. So it is a fine balance. So today, for our public officers, for example, there will be some who will actually need to use the internet, okay? And we don't want to be overzealous. Not everybody deals with high-level security that everything is blocked, okay? There are some work that you do, actually I don't need to assess that level of security. So we have different levels of security clearance. And majority of the people actually don't need to be cleared at that level. So don't have to be so kiasu per se. And just clear everybody at the highest level, just in case you need that level of security. So with that differentiated level of security clearance, we are able to then say, okay, for this category, yeah, of course you can have internet in your laptop. Okay, because there is a firewall that prevents the internet from going into our high security level data and information. So like I said, we have to learn to be smarter and learn how to use some of this technology to our advantage. So to answer your question, the balance is really to strike that level of security, to say these people that need this level of security. Then, let's say, for example, my laptop, I will not have internet access. But I have an iPad that I can have internet access, okay, which doesn't give me access to that high level of security in terms of emails and so on and so forth. So there are different channels and different paths for you to get information and for you to get your job done. So for example, as we are doing this recording, I cannot use my laptop, but I can use my iPad. So we don't shoot ourselves in the foot and say that because of high level of security, I cannot do this, I cannot do that. So life still goes on, and we still have to leverage on technology to make sure we do things in the most effective way.
And the other thing that I'll be curious to also find out from you is, given what you have seen so far in the public service and also appealing to perhaps people who might be keen to consider public service as a pivot or maybe as a starting point, do you think there are certain prerequisites, certain requirements, certain things that they should possess in order to make it swifter or to perhaps be more suitable to pursue a career within the public sector?
if you're a Singaporean or a PR, that helps.
Okay, checked.
And I think the other thing that is helpful is I'm able to say this because I come from both sides. I used to work in the private sector. And for me to make a decision to come into public service, I think inherently you must be quite passionate about wanting to serve. Okay. And I'm passionate about not just the HR profession, but I think I'm grateful to have grown up and had a career in my life, majority of my life in Singapore, which we feel safe and protected and well taken care of. And it was an opportunity for me to give back to the country and to the people that means a lot to me and the people I love. So some of the things that if you are serious about wanting a career in the public service, the things that we look at is no longer just, must be a scholar or must be a degree holder, must have first class honors, that kind of thing. I don't have a first class honors and all that. And today where we are shifting towards is really looking at competencies and looking at the values. So public service, we have a value of integrity, service, and excellence. Okay. And Singapore being Singapore, we are really operating at a high level of integrity for Singapore public service. And we are not the employer of last resort, as in our salaries are benchmarked to the median. Okay. So it is not, I cannot get any job somewhere else. Okay lah, then go and join public service lah. So we believe in paying people fairly, and we believe in paying for the competencies and the skills and all that. Of course, there are some jobs that you require some minimum qualification. If I'm hiring an engineer, I require you to have an engineering degree. If I'm hiring you as a doctor, I do require you to have a medical degree, and so on and so forth. But apart from that, we are really looking at what are the competencies that you bring and what value do you bring. Okay. And so integrity is no compromise. Anything that you do, you must be above board. So in many of our policies and all that, we make sure that it's being fair, it's above board, and there is no need for you to be corrupted because we are paying you a fair salary. Okay. The other thing that is very important for us is service. Integrity, service, and excellence. Service as in you must want to serve. Okay. You don't come and join public service and expect to be served. Because our job is to serve the public and to serve Singapore. Okay. And of course to serve the political leadership that has been elected by the citizens to lead the country. Okay. When you are prepared to come in and serve, you are probably more prepared to open up your minds and listen to what are some of the challenges and what are the citizens' main concerns and all that. And come up with ideas of how can I better serve, how can I better work this issue so that I can better serve the population. And excellence in whatever we do, how can we do it better? Okay, so we have what we call a 3D concept today that we are rolling out. So whatever things that we are doing, because public service is so large, and some of the things that we do, we have to think a bit harder because the implications are very long and far and wide. So in the private sector, when I have to implement a policy, for example, let's say I want to implement change in some benefit, dental benefit, for example. Okay, so when I used to work in Agilent Technologies, I would just call up my president and say, President or CEO, I'm thinking of changing this benefit, dental benefit from this to that, from A to B, and this is what it's going to cost, and this is how it's going to benefit. So the president will say, okay, which country, which region? All right, yes or no, go ahead and do it. Okay. In the public service, the decisions that we make impacts a very broad range of people. Okay. So, for example, changing the retirement age, raising the retirement age. And we say we want to move from 62 to 65. Can I just do it next month? Oh no, you can't. Because there are a lot of downstream implications. Okay. So that is why when we want to implement something, sometimes people call it bureaucracy. Oh, it takes so long. But the real reason is because we have to look at what are the implications, not only now, but down the road. And the scale and the impact is much larger than in just one single organization. And it's not just the bottom line of one company. It is actually the bottom line of Singapore, which is why we have to be quite careful with kind of policies that we roll out. In terms of operational excellence, we really look at whatever we do, are we thinking of the citizen at the center? So we want to operate as one trusted public service with the citizens at the center. Okay. And that means there's this no wrong door policy. Okay. And for every one of our public officers, when we say excellence in terms of what you do, and because of the long-term implications of the things that we do, every single one of us, whatever we are doing, the work that we are doing, or the work process that we are doing, let's say generating a monthly report. Okay. We will ask, the monthly report has to go out every third Thursday of the month, for example. So we ask, third Thursday normally got a lot of other things to do. Can that report be deferred? Okay. Can it be done on the fourth Thursday of the month? Because third Thursday I'm very busy with other things. Okay. And we can defer. Actually, can we drop it? Is anybody reading that report? And if I make a mistake and send it up, did anybody come back to me? Because nobody come back to me, it means actually maybe nobody read. It's just out of habit that we used to generate the report and then we keep generating the same report. So can I defer it? Better still, can I drop it? Okay. And finally, if I cannot defer, I cannot drop, can I do it differently? Can I do it change it from a monthly report to a quarterly report? Did anybody get hurt? Or did anybody die in that process of making it more efficient? So in terms of how you want to get things done more efficiently, it's no longer just efficiency as in do more with less. I think increasingly we are looking more in terms of have a growth mindset, use some design thinking concepts. How do I make it more effective for everybody in the whole value chain?
Now, one of the things that I'm really curious about, and maybe some of the listeners who are from larger companies may also would be keen to know, because PSD or public service has 15,000 people, which is really a lot.
150,000.
150,000 people, sorry. and because all this, whatever you shared, obviously very good practices. But with so many people at play, so many different divisions, with many different people managing different divisions, how do you ensure that this practice and this understanding, this alignment actually cuts across equally or get meted out through the entire DNA of all the different stat boards as well as ministries? Because I would even imagine in certain of them, like maybe there's some old-timers, some old guards that are still very accustomed to the old ways of doing things, especially those tricky situations. How does one actually look at certain strategies, resources to work around that to ensure that, hey, we have to keep forward and everyone should be on the same pace?
So Adrian, what we do is at PSD level, because we are like the corporate HQ of HR for the public service. So we will give people broad guidelines. It is like a game of golf, right? We will tell you where are the OB markers. Okay, we call those instruction manuals. Okay. So sometimes you're not clear, you can refer to the instruction manuals. And of course, a lot of these things are all digital. You can go to chatbot to find out, to ask, and so on and so forth. But that gives you the general, I think in many organizations, you have people policies and guidelines. Okay, so we provide generally the guidelines and the policies to tell you where are the red lines that you should not cross. And every year we will tell people, these are like a code of conduct that you have to comply with, that you must not cross those lines. Getting a free lunch from a vendor or something like that, or getting a loan from a vendor, interest-free, these are the red lines that you cannot cross. But that said, like you said, we have so many different agencies, okay? And we also make sure that you need to be able to operate within you have some wiggle room and operate within some boundaries. So while we set some boundaries, we give people the right level of flexibility so that they can still be creative to come up with different ways of doing things. For example, when I was in Adrian Technologies, okay, we have a whole list of 20 benefits. Okay. And then you got dental lah, holiday subsidy lah, and so on and so forth, chalet lah, and things like that. And at that point in time, we said HR have to administer 20 different benefits. Okay. Some are quite important, like insurance and all that you don't want to allow people to have adverse selection. But in the end, what we did was we combined 16 of that 20 benefits lump it into a flexible benefits. And I just tell you, Adrian, these 16 benefits, some are dental, some are holiday, and so on and so forth. I will lump it together and put it into a bucket of flexible benefits. You use whatever way you want. I'm not going to monitor that you're going to use it for dental, you're going to use it for holiday, or you want to spend all on holiday and do nothing for your teeth. So be it. Because you're an adult, I will let you decide. So in the same token, we want to give our agencies some level of flexibility so that they can have some wiggle room to also sometimes make exceptions and all that. So while we try to provide broad guidance, most of the time we give people some level of flexibility in many of our policies. So that actually allows some diversity of thoughts and some diversity of ideas, so much so that you can learn from one another. And there is so much value in knowing that, in your agency, this is how you run your onboarding process, for example. Okay. This is how you use your chatbot. And how can I learn how IRAS uses the chatbot and all that for their tax returns, and digitize everything so that it's very easy for you to file your income tax returns. And what can CPF bot learn from IRAS? What can HR learn from some of these agencies, so that it makes that interaction that we design for our citizens to be quite seamless. We can design that same process to make it quite seamless for my 150,000 public officers. So today is very much digital. If I need to apply leave and all that, it is all on my mobile phone. If I need to see a doctor, I have doctor on demand. It's all virtual, and then the MC or the medical cost and all that is all back-end processing. And I don't have to go to a clinic and queue and spread my disease or spread other people's diseases. So these are things which we also want to make sure that as we go high-tech, we are still quite high-touch. And we want to make sure that it's quite a seamless experience for our citizens and also a seamless experience for our public officers.
I think that will mark an awesome conclusion to our episode here. And thank you so much for taking the time off to share with us, to help us to understand more about public service. I personally learned so much and also dispel some of the perhaps misconception that people may have about the public service. And I think importantly, to help us to understand, especially for the users of public service, how public service is also catching up, in fact, at the forefront of whatever is happening in the larger scheme of things, to continue to maintain that sharpness, to continue to maintain a much appreciated efficiency in delivering top-notch services to the agencies, and also, of course, in doing so, to ensure that the talent pool are well motivated to create that kind of win-win, triple win situation to ensure everyone actually get a good outcome from that. And with that, Peck Kem, thank you so much for coming onto the show today.
Thank you for having me, Adrian.